Welcome to today's seminar. David Moore speaking on behalf of IRA Advantage, and today we're going to talk about combining 1031 money and IRA 401k funds into common transactions. So it's sort of a crash course on both topics. We're going to start off talking about the basics of self-directed retirement accounts, and then we're going to talk about the basics of 1031. And then we're going to blend them together. So hopefully you'll get some good information out of this today. And I always like to talk about the little nuggets of knowledge. So if I can give you one little nugget of knowledge that helps you get a deal done, whether it's for you, if you're a broker, or your clients as investors, either way, you should get something out of this. And I just want to put out there that if you've got questions, take a look at the right side of your screen. There's a section on there with questions. You can post questions. I'll try to keep an eye out on those. And I have not done this presentation before, so hopefully we'll get it done on time. Yesterday I actually managed to get through a 3-hour presentation dead on time, but I think part of that was it was the first time I'd done it online, so I didn't have many questions coming in. But like I said, or like I like to say, I should say, the only dumb question is one that's not asked. So if you've got questions, I'll try to keep an eye out for them. If I can't get to them during the presentation today, I will be getting back to you afterwards. So we'll be issuing, if you want CE for this class, please reach out to CMoore, C-M-O-O-R-E at 1031exchange.com. Celia will be issuing the credit hour, and she will also be sending out copies of this presentation of PowerPoint. And so you've got it for future use. Also, please note that it will be available on YouTube. If you want to go back and watch it again, it should be up there shortly. And without further ado, we're going to hit the road. So once again, IRAs and real estate, how to combine personal and planned money via 1031 exchange. And we've got to establish that base knowledge. So away we go. Understand that as I said, no such thing as a dumb question, but also if you've got an idea, please make note of it, and we'll take a look at it and see what we can do to help you get where you want to go. It's pretty entertaining sometimes, the questions that do come in and what people are trying to do, but I think you're going to see a variety of transactions at the end that really help people solve some problems that they didn't know were possible solutions. So that's our job. You've worked hard for your money. We work hard to keep it yours. And for those of you that don't know me, I've been, my brother and I founded Equity Advantage in 1991. So we've been in that business for, it's our 30th year anniversary, actually 1031. So that's pretty funny that that's coming up, and our fiscal year's the actual code. So it must have meant we were supposed to be in that business. Anyway, during the recession, the late 2000s, we had lots of clients who were wanting to free up money, capital, to take advantage of other opportunities, or sometimes to save properties that they had. And so we put IRA Advantage together in late late 2000s to handle people and their retirement account investment needs. And as I said earlier, a lot of those transactions were actually put together to help people salvage properties or take advantage of the market at that point in time. Obviously, lending was scarce. People had opportunities out there, but were having a hard time finding the capital to take advantage of those opportunities. And the retirement accounts were a great source of money for that. So when we look at a self-directed IRA, and I see Jim Munson on here, so I always think Jim clear back on the Mart presentation, I think with Pensco and a couple other people presenting years and years and years ago as a day-long presentation on self-directed retirement accounts. And I think we've learned a lot about Mr. Rice's investment opportunities, a lot more about those than we did actually on how to do stuff at that point in time. But it was a great intro for a lot of people into this topic. And I wanted to say a self-directed IRA, it's not a legally defined term. It's just a term that describes an account that allows you to go do what you want to do. And this is not new. They've always been possible. It's always been possible to buy real estate with a retirement account. It's just a well-kept secret. So when we look at these things, by law, an IRA can buy literally anything other than collectibles, life insurance contracts, or stock in a sub-S company. And if we look at how hard or easy or hard it is to create one of these things, it's very, very simple. I mean, we're simply going to have a situation where we are really just, in most cases, just changing from a trust company that won't allow you to do what you want to one that does. And it's not a tough thing at all. And I just want to stress that once again, if somebody's wanting to do something, it's simply a situation where we're changing a custodian in many instances. If you've got a 401k plan, for example, and you want to go out and change and you've got just a plan that allows you to buy Wall Street stuff, and you want to go out and actually diversify into real estate and everything else, typically those plans are not, it's not a restriction by law, it's a restriction that you've got that is based upon the plan document. So it's really a different situation there. Once again, I want to stress, when people have things that they want to do, typically a restriction, if it's outside what the law allows, it's a plan document issue or it's a custodial issue. It's not an issue by law. So I'm actually noticing that I don't have the PowerPoint playing at this moment, so I'm going to have to try something real quick. And we will be off to go again. So it's really entertaining when we're looking at retirement accounts, getting them in or out of things. A lot of times we've got the objection that, for example, Wall Street has on self-directing accounts is you're buying assets that are not necessarily liquid assets. And so one of the big objections that Wall Street has about self-directing is that what happens when you get to RMD stages, required minimum distribution stages at the end of the day. And let's say you are at a point where you've depleted all the cash in the account and you're forced into taking that RMD. Well, the easy solution there is to take an in-kind distribution. So we work, in addition to doing 1031s and retirement accounts, we do a lot of structure with limited liability companies, contributions, distributions, but we use those entities to structure a lot of transactions. So we have a lot of fun with that. We actually can convey assets back and forth, and some of the solutions we have are actually based on that structure when we're making things happen. As far as even paying off an asset that's owned by you individually using retirement funds, we can get around some of the potential pitfalls by contributions and distributions, get things taken care of. But I think at least you guys are able to see what I'm talking about now. So we're on the page, first page in, self-directed IRA, what it is. We've talked about that. It's not a legally defined term. It's just a term that describes an account that allows you to go do what you want to do. So if we go to how we put these things together, you understand it's typically going to take us 2 to 4 weeks to put one of these accounts together. And if we look at those transactions, the reason it takes so long is a situation where we are really moving those funds, and the problem is getting custodians to listen to what's going on, and typically the entity that's giving up those funds is not real excited about doing so. So they're in a situation where I'm still not, you guys are still not seeing what I want you to see. This is really frustrating. All right. Hopefully you get to that now. I really genuinely apologize about this. All right, so it happens to me too. Everybody that has this frustration over time. Let me see if I can stretch it this way and we can get around at least having to deal with what I'm working on right now. Well, this should work even if the other isn't. So as far as putting these accounts together, it takes 2 to 4 weeks to do it, and it's pretty easy. Usually what we're all talking about is just filling out a 2-page application with us. We need that along with a copy of a photo ID and your current account's most recent statement. And as soon as we've got that stuff, we can put the transaction, put the account together. And really the first thing we're talking about IRAs, we're just going to establish a custodial account. And then one of the forms we fill out is a transfer authorization form, which allows the new trust company to go to the old trust company and say, give me the money. I want to stress it's not all or nothing. And if we're talking about IRAs, the best thing I can tell you is keep your Wall Street money where it is. Move the self-directed money into the new account, because by doing it that way, you've isolated those two accounts. The accounts you've got with us are something you've got to be very careful with, because if you've got Wall Street investments, rarely could you ever cause a prohibited transaction with a institutional IRA. But if you're working, dancing in my space, the self-directed world, there's really very little safety net. So these accounts are not right for everybody. There's something you've got every time. If you've got a checkbook IRA, you've got total control of this account. You have to be diligent to make sure that every time you pull out that checkbook IRA, we'll talk about checkbook IRAs, what I mean by that in a few minutes. But every time you pull out that thing, you've got to make sure that you're totally on top of what this is. What am I doing with this money? Who am I writing the check to, and what's it for? And make sure you're not going to do something that would be considered a prohibited transaction. So if we're looking at putting them together, very easy, takes 2 to 4 weeks. Bulk of that time's moving the money. If we're talking about a basic self-directed IRA, we're just moving from custodian A to custodian B. The deeded owner of the property is going to be the trust company for benefit of your IRA. If we're talking about a checkbook IRA, on the other hand, really the investment the trust company makes is in the membership interest in a limited liability company that you're going to be the manager of. So they're only involved with one investment. That's the investment in the LLC. You will have a bank account in the LLC's name and federal tax ID number at the institution of your choice. And you as manager are going to have the power of the pen. So as soon as the investment in the LLC is made, it's a very easy thing going forward. But once again, consider, it's going to take 2 to 4 weeks to get this thing together. And I guess if you're a broker working with somebody with a retirement account, you want to make sure that you understand where they are in this transaction. Are they set and ready to make those investments? Because you can't just write an offer between the seller and the investor and then have that transaction assigned over to the retirement account. That would constitute a prohibited transaction. So this is truly a situation where people need to get this account established before they go looking for the property. But inevitably, what happens? I mean, we advertise on the radio a lot, so we get calls. Somebody will reach out, ask us a bunch of questions. Can I do this? Can I do that? Da, 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 da. We say yes or no. And then when do you think we hear from? We hear from when they've talked to their broker and they find this perfect property they have to have. And in today's market, as you know, it's a very frantic situation. And so that ability to, or inability, I should say, to actually truly write an earnest money agreement personally and then sign it over, the reason that's a prohibited transaction is because there's an action between disqualified parties. There's an action that benefits a disqualified party, and that's why you personally can't tie something up and assign it over to the plan later. It's critical that you have things set up before you get started on this. Take the time to research what you want to do, ask the questions. As I said earlier, the only dumb questions one you don't ask, and be ready to go. And the other thing I'll say is it's interesting to me about if I compare and contrast our retirement clients to our 1031 clients, and a lot of those are crossover. It's funny, I might handle exchanges for somebody for decades, and then all of a sudden we put a retirement account together for them. I've never seen them. And all of a sudden they come in with a retirement account. I said, well, gee, we've been handling your exchanges for the last 20 years. I haven't seen you, and now you're in here. Why now? Well, this is my retirement account, which is sort of interesting to me because I just look at all the money as your retirement account. You're trying to get yourself where you want to go. But it's interesting in the 1031 world, people literally give us their money for a period of time. I mean, that's the exchange process. They give an asset, the money comes and sits with us. retirement accounts, we don't touch the money. The money's always going trust company to trust company, or trust company to 401k plan, or 401k plan to 401k plan, depending on what structure we're using. And as far as the ultimate investment vehicle, it might be a basic account where the plan's the direct owner, or an IRA is the direct owner, the trust company is, or we're using a checkbook IRA with an LLC, or maybe we're doing a rollover business startup, or a combination of a 401k plan and a C corporation. So it can be a whole variety of different things depending on how, what kind of account the people have and what they want to do with that money. So, our job's sort of to take all those pieces and pile them all up and get, shake it out and make sure we're distilling the deal in the most simple, conservative structure possible to get the person out of what they don't want into what they do want. And my comment about segregating accounts when we're talking IRA funds, it's based upon the fact that if you committed a prohibited transaction with a self-directed IRA, all money in that account is treated as distributed as of the first day in the year in which the indiscretion occurred. So it's really important that with IRAs especially, you're very conservative, and we're going to segregate funds when we can. With the 401k plans, only the money involved with the indiscretion is treated as a distribution in a prohibited transaction. So it's different with 401k plans, tremendously different. And people ask me all the time, well, why is it this way with an IRA and not that way with a 401k? Well, I don't know, some senator had this or that, had the 401k plan. But you can't really rationalize it. It's just the rules, and that's just the way it is. So, really, I mean, our job's just providing an investment vehicle for our people. We don't offer investment advice. We don't sell investments. We just simply provide the investment vehicle. If we're talking 1031s, we're the conduit out of what you don't want into what you do want via 1031 exchange. If we're talking retirement accounts, we're just the conduit out of what you don't want into what you do want by the investment vehicle. And beyond that, it's your job to make the investments you want. I will tell you that it's very easy to get upset with your financial advisor if an investment's not working out, but you're not going to have, once again, that opportunity to commit a prohibited transaction. I put these accounts together for people. Some people never use them because all of a sudden they've got the power of the pen. They've got the ability to make these things happen, and the weight of that investment falls squarely on their shoulders, and sometimes it's not something that ultimately they want to do. So you've got to be prepared, understand that it's all on you with a self-directed account. As far as that day-to-day operation, as far as questions, concerns, that's why we're here. We're going to keep you on the rails the best of our ability and ensure that you're getting where you want to go with it. But as I said, we don't sell investments. We don't give investment advice. We're just going to provide the investment vehicle. And this slide is just sort of talking about, once again, the limitations that you currently have. If you don't have a self-directed IRA, the limitation is based upon the custodian. If it's a 401k plan that's not allowing you to do what you want, it's based upon the plan document. So with a 401k plan, a lot of times we'll say, okay, gee, if the current plan doesn't allow it, and believe it or not, we've dealt with some people with plans from very big companies, and they're being told they can't do something, and the plan document says they can, and the trustee and the administrator had no idea of that. So first thing we do, if you've got a situation where you got a 401k plan, you want to know whether something will work, we're going to want to look at the plan document, see what it allows. If it doesn't allow the investment you want, maybe we can amend the plan to allow it. If we can't amend the plan, we'll replace the plan. So it's just a question of steps, and we have to understand where you are to be able to give that pathway forward. Why look at one of these things? Why would you consider a self-directed retirement account? And obviously in times where the stock market's booming along, and I know we've got a couple of CCIMs on this call, and I remember a meeting in the late 90s. Just during all that tech activity before the crash on it, and I remember somebody spoke at one of the meetings, and I believe it was like Amazon, or one of these other big tech startups at the time, and somebody asked the question, well, are you going to make any money, or when are you going to make money? And the comment was sort of along the lines, well, we don't have to. But it was a pretty crazy time. So when the market's going crazy like that, our business typically slows down a little bit, because why jump off that, that bandwagon? But historically, we've got a roller coaster there. So anytime people are looking at a situation where the markets may be changing a little bit and people want to go out, diversify, that's when they come to see us. Or maybe they need to do something, that's what happens. But a lot of times people just come because with the lack of liquidity of real estate. So a lot of times Wall Street people say, well, gee, real estate's not liquid, that's not a good thing. Well, the lack of liquidity gives stability, where the stock market's going up and down daily. I mean, each day I wake up, I take a look at it to understand where we're going that day. But people come to us because they're tired of the stock market's roller coaster, maybe greater financial control, invest in what you know, increase investment flexibility. What's the ultimate tangible asset? We all hear the ads for gold, silver, palladium, whatever that might be. Well, I'd say real estate's the ultimate tangible asset. All those things I just mentioned, they have to go up in value to make you money. I always joke I'm in the business of selling real estate to real estate people. Real estate doesn't have to do that. I mean, ultimately it will over time. But no matter what, you're going to have some tax benefits of ownership during that period of time. Maybe if it's a retirement account, you don't get those, but you're going to have the cash flow. You're going to have somebody else, buying that thing for you. So I just love real estate. And I believe it's the ultimate, it's the ultimate tangible asset. And the funny thing to me about, basically gold, silver, real estate, all these things in the investment world are considered alternative investments. Those of you that have listened to my presentations before know that I've got, that's a little bone of mine. I don't see how you can talk about the oldest investments known to mankind and treat them as alternative investments, and things like synthetic derivatives are legitimate real investments. So just think about that stuff. And when you hear those ads on tangible assets, understand that if you're looking at real estate, it's a tremendous asset. It's obviously something that I believe wholeheartedly in. Community-based investments. You want to make a difference locally, you can do that. So you can make a difference where you are. If you see opportunities, you want to make some investments that they're going to help that community, hey, go for it. That can happen. Take advantage of today's opportunities, ups and downs. There's always going to be different things going on. You just sort of have to look at what you've got and what you want to do with it. And again, we're going to help you work through that stuff. Tangible assets, don't need to talk about that anymore. Security. If you buy something, and well, even if we just look at a solo 401k or a checkbook IRA, you're literally putting the money in the institution you choose. So if you've got a regional bank that you like, you can have a bank account in the 401k plan's name and federal tax ID number. If you've got a checkbook IRA, you're going to have a bank account in the limited liability company's name and federal tax ID number. So it's literally where you put it. And then as far as making those investments, they're going to be as secure an investment as you want to make. Now, do you have the ability to screw up and put it in something that you shouldn't? Yes. And I mean, we had somebody that literally took money to Vegas and blew it all. Well, that's a big problem, obviously. And the big problem, number one, is you lost all the money. Number two, it would constitute a prohibited transaction. So not only did you lose the money, all money's treated as distributed, plus you're going to have a 10% penalty. So that's a very, very costly loss. So you've got to be mature about this stuff, and you've got to be diligent when you're overseeing these accounts, and because you truly have the power of the pen, you got to make sure it's going where you want it to go. If you want to buy cryptocurrency, you can do that with these accounts. A new business startup, a rollover business startup is what we do in that space. So we literally are going to move your retirement funds into a new 401k plan. The plan buys the corp makes the investment in the business or whatever that thing might be. So common objections. So you talk to your financial advisor about doing this, or somebody in the tax and legal world or the finance world. I really think a lot of times the accounting world is educated a lot of times by the financial advisors world. But typical objections: loss of long-term capital gains tax rates. Why would you take your retirement account, go buy real estate when you don't have the long-term capital gains tax rate? Now, understand this might be an entirely moot point if President Biden passes his tax reform, because I mean, we're looking at a max capital gains tax rate that could be as high as 39.6% if this thing goes through. And I'm going to warn you, this is retroactive to April of 21. At least that's what we're hearing. So and this is not part of this presentation, but I'm going to tell you, if you're contemplating a sale and considering paying tax this year, I would really think long and hard about it. Talk to your tax advisor, your financial advisors, understand where we're headed with this reform. And once again, I want to stress that these tax increases, the proposed tax increases, are at this point proposed to be retroactive to April of 2021. Any change, if it happens to 1031, would be effective January 1, 2022. But you've got to understand, we're very, very, very busy right now. And I think lots of people are trying to get where they want to go before the tax laws change. And what I'm telling you is it might be too late. So understand these tax consequences now, where we're in a real flux situation, but take advantage of your financial people out there. Ask the questions before you trigger any tax consequence on a disposition of anything. But one of the long-standing objections for the Wall Street world for you to take money and go buy real estate is that loss of long-term capital gains tax rates, which really a moot point, because no matter what you've got in that retirement account, it doesn't change the tax treatment. You're going to have the same tax consequence when you take anything out. So yes, it's not, if you're stating if you could only buy real estate with money out of your pocket or money out of the retirement account, I'm going to tell you to do it out of your pocket, because that way you've got a whole bundle of benefits that you don't have using a retirement account. For example, the cash flow is yours, interest deductions, depreciation. At the end of the day, the long-term capital gains tax rates, you do 1031. Where the retirement account owns it, you do not. I think the best piece of advice I can give you is, if your retirement account owns an asset, don't think of it as yours. If you think of it as yours, you're going to potentially have issues. If you think of it as Susie down the streets, I think that's the best way to look at it. And even if we're looking at the lending on these things, any loan on a retirement account has to be non-recourse. So you've got to be careful there. They can't, in a default, the only thing the lender can do is take the asset. They can't come after you. The loan should not be subject to your credit or your reserves, other assets that you've got. So once again, I want to stress that if you have a property that you want to buy and it's going to require a loan, it has to be non-recourse debt. And it's going to apply. You could not, since this presentation is talking somewhat about joint ownership between qualified money and personal money, you can't say, okay, I'm going to get the loan and it's going to be recourse to me on my half and non-recourse to the retirement account side. That does not work, because you're still getting the loan, because you're allowing them to get their teeth in you. So once again, anytime we're talking about a retirement account in an investment property, it's got to be non-recourse debt. Okay. The next bullet, we talked about RMDs a little bit. If the money's not available, I think one of the big objections there is, gee, you're going to have penalties there. One of the biggest benefits of these retirement accounts is if you want to go buy something and ultimately you want to personally own it, well, you simply take in-kind distributions. So what you're going to do, instead of taking a cash distribution, so the laws changed recently, but so now we're at 72 years old when you have to take an RMD. It used to be 70 and a half, but when you hit 72, now you've got to take required minimum distributions, RMDs. So typically everybody considers an RMD to be cash. Well, it doesn't have to be cash. It can be in kind. And one of the big benefits of doing it in kind, number one, you can take an asset out. So let's say you buy a piece of property and you want to take that asset and personally own it. Well, you can take either a tenancy in common interest in that property as a distribution, or you could take and do an assignment of membership interest. I like the assignment of membership interest because you're not changing the deed to the asset every time. Either way, if you're transferring a minority interest, it's possible for you to discount the value of that asset by up to 40%. So this is commonly used in gifting, but it's also something that can be used in retirement accounts on distributions. The idea is, well, why can we discount it 40%? The reason you can discount it up to 40% is because you don't have control with minority interest. If you want to sell it, you can't do that. You don't have to control the asset, therefore it's not worth the face value, and the discounting is typically up to 40% in that situation. So when we're talking about in-kind distributions, the great thing is you can take things out, and a lot of times you can maybe transfer things out maybe quicker with a lower tax consequence by taking those minority distributions. The downside of an in-kind distribution is you're incurring a tax liability without receiving the cash to pay the obligation. So for example, if you take a $10,000 cash distribution, maybe you're going to give up $4,000 of that to tax. Well, if you take a $10,000 in-kind distribution of that real property and you don't discount it, you're still looking at that $4,000 in tax. Maybe if you discount it, maybe you're looking at $2,500, but you still don't have it. You're going to have to come out of pocket that money. So a great solution to that would be to simply do it as soon as you've taken the asset out entirely, to do a cash out refinance of that asset. Now, I've got, I see another familiar name on this list of attendees today, and my buddy Bob, talked about taking an apartment building out years ago, and he was going to do, actually, he wasn't going to take it out, he was just going to do a Roth conversion of the asset. And the Roth conversion, he was going to just do it and pay the cost of the Roth conversion with the refi, the cash out refi would have taken care of the tax obligation. So look around to understand what's there. Don't take things at face value and say, oh, gee, you can't take a piece of something as a distribution. You can't buy a rental or a retirement house with an IRA because that you can't use it. That's correct. You can't use that thing in any way until it's been taken out entirely, but you can take and go and buy that retirement house. And if you're taking in-kind distributions over a series of times, each transfers a minority interest, you can chop your tax liability by up to 40%. In that scenario, you're still going to own that property, and at some point, as soon as it's out, you will be able to retire into it. So all these things are possible. It just takes time. This morning, I took a quick call. Somebody had a question that needed to be addressed, and so I did take it, and we went through, and the guy had some pretty interesting ideas, and I sort of started visiting with him about contributions and distributions in and out of LLCs and how it's possible to contribute things and take things out and have them change hands over time. But there's something that's called the disguised sale law that sort of gives you a framework on the timelines that we have to work with in that space. But once again, if you got the question, if we don't have the answer, hopefully we're going to get you an answer on those things. The final bullet on this page, you lose interest, deductions, depreciation. True, but you're not going to get that once again with anything else your retirement account owns. So I would say, again, that's a moot point. So everything, I've given you a lot of information, a lot of sort of rambling so far. I apologize again for the PowerPoint not coming up the way it should have, but I really want to stress that ultimately I like simple. Okay, so when I'm looking at a retirement account, I look at two basic factors. What does the person want to buy, and who are they transacting between or for the benefit of? Two issues. What do you want to buy? Who are you transacting between or for the benefit of? And then we're going to take a look at what kind of account you have, and what you do for a living, and how old you are, and what you want to do with it. And then we're going to sort of look at that and then structure the proper investment vehicle for you. But it really boils down to these two issues. What do you want to invest in, and who are you transacting between or for the benefit of? That's how complicated it is. It's not very complicated. So if you've got a checkbook IRA, what are you writing the check for? And who's it between? 401k plan is going to be the same way. Those are your concerns, period. So as far as what you're going to buy, the way the law works, unless it's specifically prohibited, it's therefore allowed. Real estate's not prohibited, therefore it's allowed. So you can literally buy anything other than collectibles, life insurance contracts, or stock in a sub-S company. If we're talking a 401k plan, the only restriction with a 401k plan is collectibles. So it's really wide open for people as to what you want to buy. So that next component is, who are you transacting between or for the benefit of? Any transaction between or for the benefit of a disqualified party would constitute a prohibited transaction. Who's a disqualified party? well, you're a disqualified party to your retirement account, as would be your spouse, your parents, grandparents, kids, grandkids, their spouses, or any entity owned in a controlling interest by one of those. So lineal ascendants, descendants, their spouses, or any other legal entity owned in a controlling interest by one of those. Those are all disqualified parties. Now you can transact along with a disqualified party, you just can't transact between them for the benefit of. So what I mean by that is, once again, today's title, combining qualified money and 1031 money, that's fine to go into a common investment. You just couldn't sell to, buy from, loan to, borrow from a disqualified party. That's where the issues are. Now at the bottom in the bold, you can see that aunts, uncles, cousins, even siblings are not considered disqualified parties. So, it's really a lot more open than you might think it would be, but that's really what we're concerned about, those issues. As far as pitfalls, traps, exclusive benefit, UBIT, UBIT's unrelated business taxable income or income tax. Sometimes, we're talking about UBIT if we're looking at leveraged investments. For example, if we're looking at an IRA, any income or gain that's attributable to other people's money is going to have tax exposure. So we're looking at an IRA-owned asset and it's 50% loan to value. And by the way, if we're talking about non-recourse IRA 401k compliant debt, you're probably looking at 60-65% loan to value at most. You're going to be in a situation where they're probably going to want to see 15% reserves, and they're going to want to know you've got some background in investment real estate. Otherwise, they're going to have concerns there. So, it's just got to be something that fits that situation. But if it's 50% loan to value, any income or gain attributable to other people's money with an IRA, you're going to have tax exposure for. And you might say, well, gee, David, I've got a Roth IRA, I shouldn't have any tax. Well, it doesn't matter. Any IRA, you're going to have tax exposure on income or gain attributable to other people's money. 401k plans, you don't. And once again, why is it that way? I don't know. Some senator had a 401k plan and wanted to do it, didn't want to have the tax exposure. The other reason you're going to kick up UBIT is if you're conducting business. So if you're flipping properties, for example, you're going to have tax exposure. It doesn't fit. And when we're looking at flipping properties, I typically look at the Clarkowski case, 9 points used to determine dealer status, and that's what we're going to be looking at as far as sort of ascertaining whether somebody's going to have exposure on UBIT in that scenario. And as far as the typical reasons that people commit prohibited transactions or the typical triggers of it, it's borrowing money from your retirement account. Now, a 401k plan, you can borrow half what's in it to a max of $50,000. IRAs, you cannot borrow money from. Selling property to, loaning to, borrowing from, buying from, selling to. The reason we've got that receiving unreasonable compensation for managing a property, sweat equity is not okay. So if you want to go out and buy an investment property, you want to go fix it up, you cannot do that. That would constitute a prohibited transaction. There's a benefit to a disqualified party. So, as far as sweat equity is concerned, we just say you can do the administrative functions of management of an asset. You shouldn't go out and get dirty on it. So what I mean by that is don't get out there with a paintbrush or hammer and start working on the property. Those things would constitute a prohibited transaction. You might say, well, gee, how are they going to catch me? And the example I always give in these classes is, well, gee, you get audited and they look at the checkbook IRA's ledger and they see a check to Sherwin-Williams for $500 and they want to see the corresponding invoice for the labor. That's how you have a problem. So just don't do it. And on the bright side, really, I'm always pleasantly surprised with our IRA 401k clients. They are more conservative on this stuff. And when I tell them they should not be working on the property, even if it's something they've always done, sometimes they're very happy to hear that. It's sort of an excuse. They can sort of say, okay, gee, I can't do it, and I'm okay with that. So you can manage it. And the reason it says unreasonable compensation is since sweat equity's not okay, well, maybe there is some argument there. Our legal counsel's position is there shouldn't be any compensation for managing the asset. You should not work on the property or properties at all. Can't use an IRA-owned asset as security for a loan, and once again, you can't buy something for personal use. You can't buy a product. Let's say Johnny's going to college. You think, hey, Johnny, hopefully he'll be done in 4 years. Probably going to be 5 years these days. But so you want to go and take your retirement account and go buy the property and let Johnny live in it for a few years. That would not be okay. Now you could buy something, have a sibling in it, but mom and dad know, kids know. That stack of disqualified parties, none of those people can have a benefit. And for some reason, we have lots of lawyers that call up and they want to, self-direct into the building that they want to occupy. And that, once again, is a problem because we've got a transaction between disqualified parties. It's not a problem for them to buy a building. It's a problem for them to buy a building they're going to occupy. And the only way around that would be to create that rollover business startup once again. So UBIT typically is going to be driven once again by leverage and or business is the two primary reasons we see a UBIT apply to things. And an easy way to consider, moving over the line on stuff is you buy an apartment complex that has a laundromat in it. The laundromat's part of the investment. So you think, gee, the laundromat's great. I want to go out and buy a laundromat. So you go buy the laundromat. Now you're conducting business and it's going to have tax exposure. So once again, it's not a reason to do or not to do something. It's just another factor to put into that return on investment. So when we're looking at real estate and what qualifies rental houses, apartment buildings, office buildings, retail centers, land, any real property to be held for investment, a future retirement home, can't buy primary residence, second home for disqualified party, or, like I said, an office building that you're going to occupy. As far as putting these things together, I'm not going to cover these. Like I said, if it's a 401k plan, we're going to move the money from the plan into an IRA. The one thing I do want to mention on this page is if you're happily employed and it's a current employer plan and you're under 59.5, you're stuck. So we've had people literally quit jobs to get access to the money. If you're over 59.5, we can roll any of those accounts into a self-directed IRA. Any IRA can be self-directed. One caveat in this situation, we're looking at moving an IRA, let's say, into a 401k plan. We cannot fund a new 401k plan with an inherited IRA. That would be a beneficiary IRA, nor can we use a Roth IRA to roll those funds into that new solo 401k plan. We've talked about this, establishing a basic account. Really, it's paperwork, moving money from custodian A to custodian B. This shows the flow of the IRAs themselves. So we're going to create the IRAs. We're going to create the new custodial account. We're going to move the money from the current custodian in the new custodial account. We create an IRA-specific limited liability company. The trust company makes the investment in the LLC, which then makes the investment in whatever it ultimately wants to make the investment. 401k plans, anybody that's self-employed without employees or with no employees outside, let's say a spouse. I love 401k plans because they're more flexible. You don't have to have a trust company. You're just going to have a bank account in the plan's name and EIN. You, as the owner of that plan or trustee of the plan, you've got the power of the pen. They work just like a checkbook IRA, so it's easy to make investments. The deeded owner of an investment would just be the plan, and you as trustees sign everything. The checkbook IRA, you're just the manager of the LLC, so you're just going to buy everything in the LLC's name. So either one of these vehicles, they work the same way. The difference is you've got a slight at the top. If you look at a SEP IRA and a solo 401k, the max contributions are up in the mid 50,000 range. They're pretty within a few $1,000s of one another. So really, as far as those two things, the 401k plan, if you don't have employees, is the best choice. If you've got employees, maybe you're using the IRA, because in today's world, liability, you got to think about it. And most people say, gee, if you've got a plan that allows investors to go do whatever they want to do, and you're offering that to them, if they have a problem with it, potentially you are going to have a problem as the business owner. So nobody seems to be accountable for their own actions these days. So once again, if you're a real estate broker, for example, self-employed, no employees, I'm going to use a solo 401k anytime I can over an IRA. If you've got a business, then and you want to self-direct some, we'd probably let you keep your 401k plan and just move what you want to use in the self-directed direction into a checkbook IRA, for example. 1031, we're celebrating 100 years this year, like I said. Hopefully we can survive another 100 years. They took away personal property a couple of years ago in 2017's tax reform. But, as far as moving forward with stuff, the worst case that we're looking at, and honestly, it scares me because the politicians get real good at dividing us, making us fight about things. But the current proposal is not that 1031 would go away, but that they cap max deferral at $500,000 per person per year. So, think about your real estate transactions, what you might be doing. And I saw a developer on this call that we do a lot of work with, and I know he's working on a transaction where it was scheduled, he's going to buy some land. It was scheduled to close, maybe next year. I don't know what's ultimately going to happen, but you've got people looking at situations where in that particular transaction there might have been a discount offered, or say, okay, gee, if we shove the sale, remember 1031's changes would be effective 1/1/22. So if you've got gains in excess of $500,000, you might try to get these deals done this year instead of next year. So it might be well worth having a little discount on what you're getting for that sale if you're looking at maybe a few percent discount versus a doubling in the capital gains tax rates or a cap at $500,000 going forward. But I would anticipate we're going to see deals maybe on a bright side for some of you out there. You might have more market velocity. You might have people that sell things when they're getting close to $500,000 number. So you might have smaller gains, more frequent transactions happen. I don't know. Hopefully nothing happens, but we'll be working on solutions. But 1031, I like simple again. It's got to be an exchange. What's given and received have to be of like kind, have to satisfy what we call the Napkin Test, and then we have to have continuity vesting. So exchanges, typically we're looking at delayed exchanges where you sell and buy. We can do a reverse exchange where we buy first, sell later. A swap is a transaction where each person has something and they're swapping properties, and it's mutually beneficial to each of them, and they're of similar value and equity. In that case, you can just do a swap. Sometimes we use an asset as partial consideration for a bigger asset. So for the person with a smaller property, that in effect is a swap too. If you look at the purchase sale agreements that most people work with, it says total consideration, it doesn't say cash paid. So we can use all kinds of different things as consideration. Anything, even cash, is not like kind. So you might say, okay, hey, I'll give you a car and a boat and some cash to go buy this thing. And somebody says, well, gee, you can't do that. You're doing an exchange. Well, the cash isn't like kind. The boat's not like kind, nor is the car. So no matter what we're receiving, we're going to have to convert those things somehow to use them. But never say never. It can all happen. So as I said, reverse exchange allows us to buy first, sell later. An improvement exchange allows us to buy something, build it out, and that project doesn't have to be complete. We just have to get what is completed and what constitutes real property. Time of transfer is going to be of like kind. Finally, warehousing. Warehousing is typically going to be something where we're doing reverse or improvement exchanges, or in that scenario where maybe you took a car or you took a smaller property as partial consideration for a bigger asset, and you take that property, you don't want it. So what happens is we warehouse the thing, we convert it to something, and then we move forward. That's what warehousing is. But all these things are possible, and they're all different forms of an exchange, and then we can get you where you want to go on that. So one, it's an exchange. Two, what's going to receive have to be of like kind. Wide open, nature rather than form. Any real property relinquished, held for investment, is going to be like kind with any real property acquired with the intent to hold for investment. To further complicate things, you can convert a residential property into an investment. You can convert a primary residence into investment. You might say, well, why would I do that? Well, think about Section 121, the universal exclusion, the 250 or 500 that was put out in 1997. It means nothing today. So we have many transactions where somebody will relinquish a property that at one point was their primary residence. Maybe they came to us a year preceding disposition. We tell them to move out of the property, and now they've established it as an investment. They can still satisfy Section 121's 250 or 500. They're still entitled to the $500,000 exclusion. We would 1031 the overage. And the same thing happens on the acquisition. We can buy a property via 1031 and convert it to a primary residence over time. I'd say wait a year or so, although there's no stated required hold period in the code. And then you've got some other guidance there that would prohibit it if you sold that property acquired via 1031 within 5 years of acquisition, be a fully taxable sale. And then we've got something called the Housing Assistance Tax Act that sort of ties your hands a little bit more. And if you've got questions on those things, please don't hesitate to reach out. One last thing on this page. If you look at 10 o'clock, it shows a 30-year leasehold interest. Why that's important is that's not deeded ownership of property, but it constitutes ownership of real property. So we're doing a lot of build-to-suit transactions on property already owned using that structure right now. That's obviously a half-hour conversation in and of itself, but it's something that if you got questions, let's say you've got an asset you don't want, you've got some dirt that you want to improve, we can help you get there. The Napkin Test. The Napkin Test says for you to be totally deferred, you need to go cross or up in value and equity between the relinquished and the replacement property. 1031's not all or nothing, so if you want to pull some money out, you'll pay tax on that, that's considered boot. If you go down and value some, that's considered boot and taxable to you. But every dollar you spend over your basis represents tax deferred gain. And again, for you to be totally deferred, you need to go across or up in value and equity. One of my biggest pet peeves in the 30 years I've been in business is people always are saying, well, you have to replace debt in an exchange, and that's totally wrong. You don't have to. Debt can go away two ways. One, by going down in value, triggers tax because you went down in value. The other way debt goes away is by adding cash. So if you look at the third paragraph here, it just says you may offset mortgage boot with cash. You cannot offset cash boot with additional mortgage, meaning if you want to reduce your debt, so think of recessionary times, typically you're going to have reduction in equity, you're going to have reduction in loan to value. You can always offset that reduction in debt with cash, but you can't. And you cannot take cash out and offset that with mortgage without tax. Continuity vesting, biggest headache with anything in an exchange is time, 45, 180 days. Vesting is the second biggest, and it's just because those with the gold make the rules, and different states have different laws. In Oregon, for example, we're not a community property state, so you might have an investment property, then you get another one, then you get another one, and then your lawyer says, gee, we ought to shove them all into an LLC to protect you. And then you go to sell one of those properties and you go out, buy 4 units or less. That loan is a residential loan. It's going to cost you more money if you go through traditional channels to get an LLC funded. So that's how easy vesting gets to be a problem. Furthermore, partnership interests are specifically prohibited from 1031 treatment. This is the flow of a transaction. The taxpayer's up top. We are in the middle, all right? The taxpayer gives us something, we sell it to the buyer. That starts the clock. Arrow 1 starts the clock. They tell us, they've got the 45 days to identify what they want to buy, 180 days to get it done. You can negotiate the purchase before the sale happens. Just don't close on anything until we're involved. If you had to close first and sell later, that's a reverse. But phase 1, you give us something. Phase 2, we give you something back. So it's been that way forever. The only thing that's changed substantially is 1991, and there's a few gentlemen on this call that I see that have been doing this a long time, and you probably remember. I always jokingly say, I think the old saying, "Buyers are liars." That was a result of 1031 IDs pre-1991, because you could literally ID a county, and it was okay. Where in 91 we have basically 3 ID options. You've got 3 property rule, 200% rule, 95% rule, and each of those rules work independently of the others. So anyway, and one last comment on identification. What you need to give is an unambiguous description of the property or properties you intend to buy. You need to receive substantially the same thing. So if you ID an entire asset and you pick up 60% of it, you're fine. If you ID an entire asset and you pick up 40% of it, you're not. So it's really important, if you're going to be buying with other people, that you identify the portion that you intend to buy, which leads me to this slide. Joint ownership of investment real estate. We can do that if we're looking at joint ownership between tax money and qualified money. We've really got 2 choices: tenancy in common or as limited liability company. The TIC structure I like because it gives people the ability to go do what they want on disposition. So tenancy in common means that and this is what's going to be required if we're doing a 1031. Tenancy in common means each person's got an undivided interest in that real property. And the great thing about it is that upon disposition, the qualified money, the IRA 401k money, is just going to go back in the retirement account, and you personally would have the choice of paying the tax or doing a tax deferred exchange. So I like that TIC structure. Another reason I like the TIC structure is that as far as if we're going to have a single entity owning an asset and it's got disqualified parties as its members, we need to overfund that the investment in that entity. So if you say, gee, I need $500,000 to make this purchase, I'm going to tell you, you probably ought to put, you know, 550 or 600 in it, just so you've got a cushion there in case there's a problem, because you can't just the initial investment in an entity is going to be fine, but future is not, and we'll talk about that more in a second. Where the tenancy in common, you're going to have a joint, I would say, have a joint checking account. You're also going to have a TIC agreement, tenancy in common agreement, that you know, that works just like an operating agreement for a limited liability company, and that thing's going to dictate the operation of the asset and what's going on with it. So you'd have a joint checking account, all expenses are paid out of, all the cash flow out of the asset goes into it, and then you can take pro rata distributions over time if you want to. You know, is there a downside to it? It depends on the type of property you want. You know, the lender, is it going to, you know, allow tenancy in common ownership? You know, typically larger assets these days. During the last crash, TIC's got a bad name, so we've got joint ownership via limited liability companies, and they don't like that TIC structure. But you know, I think the argument against it is totally unfounded. So the other option is going to be via a common LLC. So if we do a checkbook IRA, I mean, lots of times we'll put the checkbook IRA LLC will contain an individual and his or her spouse. And so it can, many times we'll have two disqualified parties. So what I didn't say earlier is if you've got a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA, those two IRAs are actually disqualified parties to one another too, in addition to you being a disqualified party to those things. So once again, I want to say, if you want to combine IRA money, let's say Roth IRA money and traditional IRA money into a common LLC, it's no different than you personally putting money in and having retirement funds in there, or you and your spouse doing it, any other combination of disqualified parties in that limited liability company. You know, I sort of brushed past it, but on the tenancy in common ownership, it's critical, like I said, I want to emphasize this a little bit more, that you have a TIC agreement. And I don't even care if it's a vacation house in Sun River that you go and play in. I mean, what are the odds 10 years from now or 5 years from now that you and that person you bought it with are going to both want it? And if one of you wants out, what dictates what happens at that point? I mean, if you sell, if that person wants to sell, do you have any control over who do they sell to? Who's paying for the refinance of the asset? What's happening with those things? And that's where that tenancy in common agreement is going to work just like an operating agreement for a limited liability company. So when we put an LLC together, you know, obviously we've got an operating agreement that's going to spell out. We've got a unit subscription agreement that's based upon people's contributions, and those could be in kind, it could be cash, it could be any combination of things, but each member of that entity is going to make a contribution to it, receive a membership interest attributable to that contribution. So we're going to do the articles, the operating agreement, federal tax ID number. And, you know, when you put these things together, you can't just, you know, file with the state and have articles and say you've got an LLC. If you don't have an operating agreement, you do not have a limited liability company. And for some reason yesterday we got a deal and said the title report said, you know, LLC, an inactive entity. Well, that's a scary thing to me. Imagine if somebody else goes and files for that entity's name. I mean, I would certainly maintain that thing. You've got to maintain those entities. So keep up to date on everything and make sure your articles are current and make sure you've got a good valid operating agreement. And then federal tax ID numbers, that sort of depends on membership and personal preference, whether we do an ID. We're doing a checkbook IRA LLC, we're always going to have a EIN for that thing. But if we're talking about real estate holding entities, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Downside, once again, lending. You know, I mean, just like I said with the you know, tenancy in common, I mean, if you're buying residential properties, they're going to want TIC. If you're buying larger assets, they're going to want an LLC. So depending on the size of the asset and who the lenders are, you might be forced into one or the other. The big issue I've got with LLCs is that you cannot exchange into or out of a membership interest. So we have to do that drop and swap and drop to get people where they want to go. If you're going to use that IRA money to buy these properties, it's once again, we want to have some contingencies in there. Even if you're just buying a piece of it with the qualified money, you need to have in there if there's going to be a loan that it's going to be a IRA specific non-recourse loan. If we're talking about just a basic self-directed IRA, we need to make sure that we include a provision in the purchase sale agreement stating that the investment's subject to the custodian's approval. And then finally, we want to make sure that the account's all set, ready to go when you're making the offer, so we don't potentially cross the line on that stuff. And it just takes time. So I want to stress again, anytime we're looking at these things, plan ahead, really get things set to go before you go jump in and try to make things happen. And all too often I get a call that somebody's found the property they got to have, and then they're going to move into it. So I see we're already a few minutes over. I've got a few examples and then we're going to wrap it up. So this is really not a combined transaction, but this is a transaction where we are looking at sort of combining transactions between tax entities and tax deferred entities. And in this situation, we're talking about a developer buying property ultimately to be developed in the future, wanted the land bank using the retirement account, and then over time, the land banking entity, the retirement account would then transfer via sale to another entity that would develop that property. Now, if we just had the taxpayer's retirement account moving assets to their construction company, that's clearly a prohibited transaction. So in this scenario, we created a new limited liability company. Our client was 1/6 member of that thing, and as such, it no longer constituted a prohibited transaction between two disqualified parties. So once again, never say never. You got to look at the facts and sort of create a situation that will allow people to get where they want to go. This is a transaction where really we're just saying, hey, this guy didn't want to deal with terrible T's anymore, and so we ended up moving his retirement accounts into a checkbook IRA, and he ended up buying hard money and didn't have to deal with those terrible T's, and ultimately. Yeah, I laugh because I don't know, probably 15 years ago now, Bob, I remember a meeting that was held where had a whole bunch of seasoned commercial brokers in this meeting, and you were introducing a topic of debt on these shopping centers and all, and somebody was so concerned about gee, what happens? They go dark, and the tenants end up losing. The property owner loses the asset, and they had to explain, well, gee, where's the money in it? So people think they own an asset. You've got a loan on it. You don't own it till it's paid off, right? So this guy had lots of doors, and he just wanted diversification. Tired of the terrible T's, so he went and just bought a bunch of notes. And I think the last one he bought was only like a 20% loan on a wind farm that was paying him 19%. So I mean, he just in the worst way wanted that company to default, and he thought that was going to be a wonderful situation for him. And I don't think that happened, but it was a great opportunity. So he was the person with the gold at that point in time. This is a bailout. This is one of those situations where this was the last crash. Developer had bought some land. It was roughly a couple $1 million. I think $1.2 million lien on the thing, and so the problem was $3 million. I'm sorry, $1.2 million lien, and he was going to lose the property. In fact, in this case, in this particular transaction, the lender was Washington Mutual. The bank was going away. The bank goes away. He loses the asset. He was a little behind, but the bank had been working with him on it. So he called up frantic. It was just one many frantic calls we had during that period of time. And he asked, well, could I take Dad's IRA to pay off this loan? And the answer, if you look at it straight up, is no. So what we did is we created a new limited liability company. We created a checkbook IRA for junior. And when we did another limited liability, or actually not for junior, for senior. So we did checkbook IRA for senior. We created a second limited liability company. Junior contributed the property, received a membership interest attributable to his 1.8 million in equity in the thing. At the same time, he contributed the property, dad's retirement account, made an investment in the LLC. Therefore, the LLC now owned the asset and had the cash to pay it off. So we saved the asset, and ultimately that project went vertical in the future, and we got everybody where they want to go. But that was, one of many examples at that point in time where people were having a very, very difficult time, and the only way out was that retirement account. So this I really like this deal. This was a gentleman that we do, actually a couple gentlemen we do lots of tenancy in common, larger investments with. We've been doing it with them for, I don't know, probably 25 years or so. And they came into us relinquishing, I don't know, it was $8-10 million property. And they were going to buy into a new one at, like, I believe around 12 million. And then they wanted to do it was a very large improvement project. So what happened is we looked at the transaction and we wanted to, actually the dirt was less, so we needed to complete the transaction. On sale, it was all tenancy in common. We pulled all the qualified money, the IRA 401k investors, so we had in this transaction tenancy in common ownership, and most of it was 1031, but we had some very large investors with IRAs and 401k plans. So upon sale, the IRA 401k money went back in those accounts. We did the 1031 for the tenancy in common. The tax money went forward via an improvement exchange. We completed the acquisition in this project we then worked on. We had a bank that was working with us on that, but the first thing we did is we used the IRA 401k money as debt on those improvements. So we got those taxpayers, they wanted to be part of the new project. So we took the qualified money and brought it in as debt to go vertical on the project. And then after we completed our what we needed to get done to get the values up to a number that made sense, that worked for them for 1031 purposes, we conveyed that project to our tenancy in common exchangors. And then a year downstream, the qualified money, the IRA 401k money, was then converted into a membership interest. So all the TICs contributed their interest into the limited liability company. The debt that the outstanding, the qualified money was representing, those notes were converted to a membership interest, and now the asset's owned by the LLC that has the qualified money and all the other investors. And these guys, we know it's always a 5 to 10 year deal. So on this situation, when it comes within a couple of years of disposition, we're going to start talking about doing a tick out once again. So we'll end up deeding from that limited liability company back to the tick, so that upon disposition, people that want to go away can go away, and we can get everybody where they want to go. Now, obviously, if everybody's willing to roll forward upon future disposition, we wouldn't have to do the drop and swap. But the game plan at this point in time is to tick it out pre-disposition, maybe a year in advance, so that nobody can attack the fact that the individuals didn't hold the property for investment pre-disposition. And one last example, and we are done. So this one, if you've been to my presentations, I always throw this one. I just love it. So what we did, we had a retired couple come into us. They wanted to self-direct their retirement accounts, go buy a mobile home park. So we first started talking to them about a checkbook IRA. And ultimately, when that conversation was sort of winding down a little bit, I thought we had some clarity there. They said, oh, did we mention we want to live there? We want to be the on-site manager. So we want to be compensated. We want to live there. Both of those things would trigger prohibited transactions with the retirement account. So what we ended up doing is shifting gears from a checkbook IRA into a rollover business startup. So we rolled both of their retirement accounts into a new 401k plan, created a C Corp, the plan bought the Corp bought the park. They got an investment, they got a job and a place to live, all with that one transaction. And I just think that's a win-win-win for everybody. So never say never, ask the questions, and hopefully we can get you where you want to go. When we're looking at those retirement accounts, plan ahead, takes 2 to 4 weeks to get it together. Purchase all types of property with an IRA, SEP, IRA, Roth. Can purchase with family members and friends, cannot purchase from or for them. Your IRA cannot sell to you or any other disqualified party. You can use an IRA to buy property with a mortgage. Negotiate from the deal's inception the IRA or IRA LLC's name. So once again, if you're a broker and they don't have that account set up, they need to write the offer between the seller and somebody that's not a disqualified party. You can't write the offer between the seller and the taxpayer and have them assign it over to the plan. I know your purchase sale agreements have the right of assignment. That's not the issue. The issue is that would constitute a prohibited transaction. So if that happens, just tear up that PSA, write a new one the way it needs to be. Now, the earnest money in and of itself, that's a harder situation. So I'd say, have your brother, sister, somebody else put the earnest money in, write the offer that way. The best thing to do is have it all set up and ready to go. Anyway, I just want to, actually one last thing on this. Don't overextend. Like I said, you can't, if your retirement account owns an asset and you run out of money in that retirement account, you can't just pay for things. The only way you're going to get more money in that is you're limited by your ability to make a contribution in that year. So don't get yourself in a situation where you spend all the money on the acquisition. Make sure you've got enough money in the account to make the acquisition and cover any potential carrying costs before cash flow happens. The same thing's going to happen if we're combining the 1031 money and plan money into those common investments. We have to make sure that 1031 is going to require TIC ownership. It's not the IRA that requires it, it's the 1031 that does. So in that situation, we want to make sure that anytime we're looking at 1031ing in with qualified money, the biggest issue is it's got to be TIC structure. The second biggest issue is got to be non-recourse debt. But other than that, it's not a problem. And you can change the nature of the investment over time, just as I gave you the example in that last institutional deal with the money going in and out and seasoning periods. And what we're doing, that's what we're going to be looking at anytime we're changing the form of ownership there. But as far as that leverage, got to be non-recourse. You can transact along with the disqualified party, you just can't transact between her for the benefit of one. So I thank you very, very much for attending today. Hopefully I didn't speak too quickly. If you've got questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'm happy to discuss all the topics we covered today and many others. But if you've got ideas on something you're working on, how to integrate 1031 money into IRAs or vice versa, I'm happy to have those discussions with you. And I think that obviously we're all, if we were involved in real estate right now, we're all probably having a good time. It's probably a pretty frantic time for us. Everybody's busy. But just understand there's lots of options up there, and if you don't ask those questions, you're not going to get the answers. So thank you very much for the time today. There's a few pages that when you get this packet via email, there's a few pages at the end that are talking about different specific IRA terms, things, a glossary at the back that'll help you with some of these things that I spoke of during this time. We'd really appreciate your support on any of our social media sites. And by the way, if you've got a topic that you'd like addressed on a video, please don't hesitate to let us know. Call up, ask, talk to Cillian here. She does all our videography. But if you take a look at our YouTube channels, you're not going to just see information on 1031s and IRAs. You've got stuff, everything from, structured sales are going to be coming up soon, but you've got even a charitable remainder trust. You've got them on opportunity zones. We've got them on even life settlements. But we try to be a resource for you and your clients. And if you've got a topic you'd like to know more about, please don't hesitate. Let us know. We'll do our best to accommodate you. All my best to everybody out there. Best of health, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.